me about your story, the journey that brought you before you wrote the books, and then what prompted you to make the shift into writing about this.
Well, the story began with some infertility issues. We had some issues when we married, even before, because I was married before, and those issues continued. So we had a number of medical interventions that at first were not successful. And I say that because then, as soon as we made our decision to adopt a child, I was pregnant. So then we had a beautiful baby girl, but then adding to our family proved to be impossible. So we had many stops and starts along the adoption route, including domestic, but then through happenstance found this organization who was working with orphanages in Mexico, and were matched with a child in Cuernavaca, Mexico. And so my first book that you see there, Love at the Border, that's my memoir, and that's our journey to adopt, and just the whole experience, start to finish. All told, it's about 15 years of our experience. So
Okay. Yeah. And so how old was your natural child when you adopted?
she was 8. So the child that we met in Mexico was 6, almost 7. So we had two, little girls. So there was a lot of adjustment that needed to happen, because the older child had been an only child for 8 years, a long time. And so our family was really turned on its head.
And so was that for you to go from to a instantly multiracial family?
And that's part of my story. That's part of what we'll talk about, because the reason I write books for children, I focus on adoption, trauma, loss, and grief. So as we were going through the process of adopting our daughter, and when she first arrived in our small little town, people would say to us, "Oh, she's so lucky. She's so lucky to be part of your family. You're such a great family. Um, it's just wonderful." And adoption is wonderful. I do believe that this has been a tremendous experience for our family. But the reason I write about it, and the unique thing that I try to focus on in my books, is the trauma of adoption, and that it begins at birth, when the child is separated from the biological mother. But then our daughter, to answer your question, had it 2 times over. I mean, she was separated from everything she knew at age 6 and 7, which, that's a lot of memories. So sights and sounds and smells and food, and the caregivers, the setting, her language. So she had some major, major losses that at the time I just didn't, it took me years to really appreciate all of that she had lost, and the trauma of her young life. And that's why I decided to write about it.
So between the time you first adopted and the time you finished writing your last book, how has your perspective changed on what you might have done differently on day one? Knowing if you knew then what you know now, which of course none of us have that mirror.
Well, it was such a traumatic time for our family. I mean, our daughter was crying nonstop. And then the older daughter was also upset. She's getting all the attention as we try to just navigate what was right, what was the right thing to do. So we balanced as much as we could. But your question about doing things over, the trauma had to somewhat play itself out. I mean, we were committed to becoming a family. I think in the behavior that I saw those years, those beginning years, that was the trauma speaking, and I took it so personally. And that was just, oh, she hates our family. She doesn't want to be here. And that was really just all part of the process. And we reached out to professionals. Well, obviously we did the best we could. And they're both wonderful professional young women right now, contributing to the world. So they're 29 and 30. I think I just would have understood just the emotions much
Mm.
more had I been better. But this was so many years ago. So much more information is out there now about this process. But when I discovered it, and I'm referring to the primal wound, that was my initial kind of light bulb moment when I read the book by Nancy Verrier. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's called The Primal Wound. And that's what I referenced just a little bit ago about the um, child being separated from his or her biological mother. And that's called a primal wound.
Right. And how does that play out? How does that play out in the everyday life of your family?
Well, it's interesting, what I've read in the literature and what I saw for myself. I mean, trauma manifests itself in many different ways. And of course, our daughter was just so shell shocked about about being somewhere else. So she was crying. There were temper tantrums, depression, disassociation, just becoming so separated from the family, not willing to engage with our family. So I've read about cases where that trauma does not happen for years and years and years. But because we were so uh, intent in a loving way and becoming this family, I think we dealt with a lot of that up front. The first decision is really a big one, and that is international or domestic. So domestic has much more connected to the open adoption concept and becoming familiar with the birth family issues and the maintaining contact around the biological family is important. Internationally, that's less of an issue. So that's really the first big decision. And as I said, the international options are fewer at this point in time.
Are you able to provide cultural support?
We had an opportunity to get to know the caregivers at the orphanage. And we stayed in touch with them almost to this day. So through her time as a child, we maintained contact with photos and phone calls occasionally. I think my daughter was in high school when we visited. My older daughter had an opportunity to actually work at one of the orphanages, not exactly the orphanage where my other daughter was raised, but we visited Mexico and spent time there. And throughout the time, we tried to provide support for her to relearn Spanish. So it was only a few months when her language just disappeared. So she, at first she said she did not want to learn English, but then it was inevitable that living with a family and being only 6 or 7, you just pick it up. So she picked it up very, very quickly, but then was unable to speak Spanish. And then as middle school approached and the classes started in Spanish language, I could just see that spark was kind of reignited. And then high school Spanish, it became more intense. Her accent was just perfect and beautiful. And then in college, she wanted to major in Spanish, and she was proficient enough to do a study abroad program in Mexico and in Spain. And so with that change, reclaiming her language was such a big part of her development and confidence. And through the years, we supported that with tutors and other things that sometimes she liked and sometimes she didn't like, but we wanted to leave it up to her. But finally, by high school, she was intent on getting that back. And then of course, college, when she came home and spoke fluently one spring break or something.
Tell me some slice of life stories that have informed your work and your life.
Every parent goes through these back to school nights, and she was just newly in our family in maybe second grade, and the students' artwork was posted all along the hallways of the school in big posters. And the theme of this particular art project was to draw someone who is so important to you, who's very important to you. And so we get to school and we're looking at their science projects and different things. So we get to her hallway with the art projects, and I'm like skipping down the hallway. I can't wait to see my picture on the poster board. And so I'm walking up and down the hallway, and I see her poster board because her signature is this little tiny, I could see her name. and there was this blonde woman that was holding a baby in the, so who, I said, who in the heck is that? And it was another teacher at the school that had recently had a child and then brought the child into school. And then my daughter was used to living with children. So she was very eager to hold this baby.
Mhm.
And so my daughter helped the baby. And she was so fascinated by the whole thing. That's the person that she drew. And I'm thinking, look at you, thinking you're so important that this kid's gonna just draw you, and she doesn't care. This is the disassociation that I talked about. She had to find her own way and her own things that she liked, people that she liked. She was very close to her ESL teacher. I'm not sure they still call it that, but when she learned English as a second language in school, uh, very close to that woman. So it just took time. And again, I took things so personally. Oh, does she love us? Does she? And a lot of hand wringing. That was just all part of the process.
I want to talk about that process a little bit because every single step parent that I know who finds themselves in this situation struggles with some of the same things. They don't like me. How are we going to make this work? I don't know what to do. I don't know if I'm doing it right. I don't have the same lens,
Mhm.
that her father or her natural mother would have. What was your process for dealing with that anxiety or angst? And you've said it's all part of the process, but what is the process? Did you get counseling or help? Did
Yes.
you connect with other parent groups? What did you find useful?
Oh, that's one of the things I definitely recommend for couples that are experiencing, family change, is to have that community of similarly situated parents. We had a network of other parents who adopted from Mexico. Um, we had a neighborhood group of folks that had adopted internationally. So we kept each other sort of kind of informed about our challenges and encouraged and supported. So that was one thing. But the other thing we did, of course, was initially we had a really neat play therapist that helped us talk together as a family. And then as my daughter's issues sort of changed, we changed therapists to others that were focused on whatever stage she was in. So, and I just want to say to listeners out there that are experiencing any family change or adoption, or whether it's stepchildren being added to a family, there were so many stops and starts to our process. I couldn't even tell you. Every single time I thought that we were making just the littlest bit of progress, something would happen and it would be, oh, I would feel like two steps back. And so it's just a matter, I think, of being consistent in, we tried to have one-on-one time with the girls. We had family activities. We had some great vacations. We had on my website, I have a couple recipes that the girls, we like to make things together. The kitchen is always a place to sort of have maybe a neutral zone sometimes. Well, sometimes it could be a neutral zone. So we made cookies together and combined, like our Mexican lasagna was something that we did together, and those kinds of things we tried to do. Um, and that sometimes kind of cooled things or brought us together, or we had a laugh, or so it was really a very much a stop and start. I wish I could say it was smoother, but it was very aggravating.
It's not uncommon. There's a trajectory that is the same no matter how your blended family becomes a blended family. There are some of these things that are universal, the trauma of change, the inconsistency, the unpredictability from day to day of what's going to rear and what that's going to look like. And then as they hit adolescence, and how did your older daughter, we've talked a lot about your second daughter, how did your older daughter navigate and how did you navigate the unforeseen feelings or changes with her?
They were completely different personalities, completely different, and understandably. Now, of course, you're coming from another country, another language. Reading and writing is hard for you. Homework is hard. School is hard for you. Our other daughter, school was, easy breezy, and it was um, that in and of itself was difficult. So because we had so much time and attention focused on one child's homework, and our younger daughter spent more time trying to get out of homework than actually doing it. So it was comical. I mean, we did have it was really funny a lot of times. And we had this one in grade school, I'll never forget, we had this thing called Reading Olympics. And maybe kids, that resonates with parents and some kids. And so there's a big to-do. You get the books, there's like your little teams and a t-shirt. So they were 2 grades apart, only 1 year apart in age, but 2 grades apart. But they both did this, Olympics thing. So my older daughter was reading up a storm, like was captain of the team. And then my other daughter just pretended to read all books and didn't really read them. She put the t-shirt on and went, but I don't, it was hilarious when we realized what was happening later, but it was just one of those things that just highlighted their differences. So I would say they're still not very close to this day, which is, a little bit sad. So we're getting there and still doing things together.
Mhm. Well, at the age of 8, in the birth order world, if there's more than 5 years separating the children, they each have an experience of being an only child because the parents, are so different 8 years
Right.
apart
That's true.
anyway. So there's that, and then the commonalities. You're talking sometimes a generational difference in 8 years of
Yeah, right.
experience.
Right.
Yeah. So did any of this impact your marriage in ways that you can identify? Raising any children at any given point through all the stages of getting through college is going to challenge a couple. But
Mhm.
was there anything that you can pinpoint that may have been different, not knowing what different would be, but
I was really lucky. We had such a natural divide and conquer sort of mentality.
Mhm,
My husband's a professor, and he very naturally gravitated towards the homework checking, the math lessons. But
mhm,
after a while, we had the advice that he needed to, kind of pull back from that.
uh-huh,
So we both had our individual time with the girls, and as I said, family time, vacations, and special things. So we we were actually stronger as a result of everything. So it was real. We were really fortunate that we were on the same page much of the time, and
uh-huh,
it was it was really a roller coaster that we tried to enjoy a lot. um,
uh-huh,
but there were hurdles for sure. And so I pick up on some of those big kind of learning points in my books. As I said, the unique thing about my books is that I think they encourage parent-child discussion for these difficult topics. For instance, um, you know, you're not my real father. You're not my real mother. Or things that we would hear, and I included those types of things in my books. And in the book, How I Wonder Where You Are, it's the adopted child's wondering about um, their biological roots. Where did I come from? Who do I look like? And it's just natural for children to think of these things. And I wanted children to have those thoughts and parents not be threatened by them, and children to express those thoughts without fear of abandonment. And so all these things are wrapped up, that these topics that I try to tackle in those books, because I think it's healthier for these discussions, and families can thrive because of that.
Well, and the beauty of writing a children's book about a complicated issue is that it invites the entire family to open a dialogue around something that they may be
Exactly.
experiencing
Yes.
but don't have words for. So I think that's fabulous. What age group are your books written for?
The picture books are written for ages approximately 4 to 10, I'll say, just because these topics are a little heavier. And even though the books may look like, picture books for little kids, parents can use them to move forward on some of these topics. The latest book, that, as I mentioned, called Grace's Right Time, is for children. It's a middle grade book, ages 8 to 12, and
Mhm.
that is the story of a young girl who's very book smart and loves to read and write. And she moves to a new city. She has trouble making friends, so she meets a boy named Andy, and he enlists her help to find his birth mother. So his adoption was had a little bit of a secret, private aspect to it, and so they have an adventure to find his birth mother.
Which is your favorite book?
Well, the last one, the one I just wrote, of course, is my favorite so far, but just because it's the first time I've done it and I really enjoyed writing it. The three picture books just brought back so many memories, as I said, because the incidents portrayed in the books all happened to our family, um,
Mhm.
and were part of my daughter's um, acclimation to this culture in the U.S., her thoughts, her feelings, her
Mhm.
anger, her tears, her difficulties. So I wanted to represent those, and they're I'm happy with the way they are portrayed. The illustrator, I think, did a great job, and I think families would benefit from reading them together.
And those can be found where?
Those are available in Amazon and in Barnes and Noble. If you go to my website, where the QR code is there, I'm not sure if your
Yeah.
listeners can see things, but it's amdidio.com. So amdidio.com. And then there are links to all the books on the website. There are many other podcasts about adoption. There's a woman, Beth Syverson, Syverson, and she has a good resource guide for adoption related resources on her website. To those interested, she has more of a compilation of things. Mine are kind of I do a lot of writing on Medium about different topics, and that's on my website.
I would be fascinated to hear your your growth experience on the other side of these stories. So we're going to talk about You're Not My Dad. Great. What's mom going through when this is happening in your household? You
Well,
know?
a little bit of that is in my memoir.
Okay.
Yeah, the Love at the Border, because it includes the struggles leading up to and decision to adopt, and then the first 10, uh, at least 10, 15 years of our family kind of getting used to this whole.
Excellent.
So that's in there. I touch on it, but you're right. It could be fleshed out a little bit more. So have
Yeah.
your listeners take a read.
I'm fascinated to read it myself. I definitely will.
And just be patient and kind to yourself. There's a lot of being written now about trauma and how trauma manifests itself in the body, and pay attention to those things and take it one step at a time. I was very much in a hurry for us to be that family, and when there were so many stops and starts, as I said, I was very impatient. So it was all part of the process. And now when I talk to my daughter and she says, "Remember the time we did this?" and she has these happy memories, it just makes me want to cry. I mean, I'm so glad that that's really what or she'll want to make something, or she'll ask me for a recipe, or it's amazing. It's wonderful.
Well, thank you for your time. I certainly appreciate it.